And happy to welcome in Thomas Jane, the one and only Thomas Jane here to UAP, the Unidentified Alien Podcast. Really excited to talk to you because you have a really cool perspective on a lot of the issues going on in the UAP world. So, Thomas Jane, thanks for coming on here. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
No, it's great. And so, I have a whole list of questions here for you today, but I wanted to start with, I guess the best place to start is at the beginning, as they say. So, how did you kind of get into the discussion, kind of down the rabbit hole of the UAP phenomena? What kind of brought you to all this?
Well, I certainly wouldn't be talking about any of this if it was pre 2017, 2018. It's really 2018. And then to that it became uh, sort of publicly acceptable. Actors we're all crazy out here in Hollywood anyway. So I wouldn't have expected to get I would have expected to get short shrift for the for bringing up aliens. That's not my style. But events it's over the past couple of years have shown that this is a serious subject that needs to be talked about. And even though we've certainly changed the game in the last 4 years, we have a long way to go. It's the most important subject in the world, in the history of man. The idea, and we're still wrapping our minds around this, that not only are we not alone, but there's very advanced intelligent societies, so civilizations. We don't even know what to call them. We're just calling them that because that's what we are. We understand conscious, intelligent, social beings to create some sort of civilization, and the output of that is some sort of technology. So we can sort of correlate our own understanding, and that's really all we can do. So as our technology evolves, so does the conversation about what these beings may be. I'm not sure that in the late 1890s there was a giant airship wave that sort of swept the country and parts of the world, definitely the UK and some other parts. How much reality there was to that is really tough to tell because there was a lot of yellow journalism at the time, and certainly sensational stories became viral in their day. But if there was any truth to those airship stories, and there are a few, Lauren E. Gross has an unpublished book, a prehistory of the phenomenon, something like that. But he wrote a really terrific, sort of deeply researched book about that first UFO wave in the late 1890s.
Yeah.
And he's got some really interesting news stories. Some of them are obviously, completely made up and just catching the wave, so to speak. But there's some really interesting other stories in there with real witnesses. So who knows, really? It's funny, as we get better at recording history, it's still difficult to sort of separate the wheat from the chaff, as it should be. You can't figure this out over a weekend.
Yeah, well, ain't that the truth? We've been asking the question for a long time.
And we're
There was something
slowly coming to some sort of conclusions, and one of them is that the phenomenon is real.
Right.
But my point was that in the late 1890s, the way they described the craft were consonant with late 1890s technology, right? Propellers and wings and they even described the giant spotlights as in candle power. So that's what we're doing the same thing today. We're trying to understand the phenomenon using what we know. And right now, AI has become sort of an interesting component to the conversation. It always has been, at least, in some capacity since the late 40s. But now our understanding of what AI is capable of and what the possibilities have definitely informed the conversation. And as we evolve, so will the conversation. That was my
Yeah.
point. Sorry.
That's a good point. I wanted to ask you about AI actually, but before I get to that, there was something that you said at the beginning of your answer where you said, you know, you didn't want to sound like, the crazy alien guy in Hollywood. And so I'm wondering, because that's something that we all say, right? It's if you work in an office and, you're in a cubicle with your friends, you don't want to sound like the crazy alien guy at work or whatever it might be.
Right.
So how much of that stigma does exist? Is it just like any other, like, is Hollywood just like any other workplace where you don't want to sound like the crazy person? Or, I mean, how is the conversation looked at in, behind the scenes?
Hollywood is just like any other workplace. Absolutely. A lot of smart people doing focused on doing a great job. Not a lot of room for other conversations unless you're talking to a writer.
Hmm.
But it's always been a closed conversation. It's a closed loop. I mean, essentially, people who are open to the idea are open to it, and people who aren't. And we've all sort of created a little UFO basket in our brain,
Hmm.
and we've come to a conclusion, even if that conclusion is, I don't know, maybe. But that's about as far as the conversation goes. So part of our job right now is to try to expand the basket, of what people are kind of carrying around when they think of alien visitation and UFOs. So that's part of the challenge and the opportunity of this era that we're living in right now. Which just expand people's brains just a little bit to make a little bit more room for not only are they here, but what is that? What's the potential? What are the
Yeah.
potential? What are the risks? What are the benefits? What does it mean for us? I think is an important conversation to take it out of the esoteric, kind of like, is there a God basket, and put it into what does it mean for us as a society, for us, for the future of humanity, and we have trouble thinking about those things. Everybody's very focused on sort of paying the rent and
Hmm.
moving up in their career or getting married, the things that we really worry about and strive to accomplish in this life. Though those are the number one sort of human, drives that we're all sort of indoctrinated into. But there are other considerations, and certainly alien visitation helps us to expand the band.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I've heard that before from just different people who outside of the basket, so to speak, right? That maybe may not want to get into this discussion. And, some of the things I hear are like, well, when aliens start paying my bills, then I'll worry about it. And,
Sure.
we get it, right? It's not the everyday thing that's on your mind when you're driving into work and stuck in traffic. But it's such, like you said when we started, it's such a huge issue, maybe the most consequential issue out there when you really start to sit and think about it.
Bigger.
Yeah. Is there anybody in particular that comes into your mind that you do feel comfortable, like if you're on the set, with a particular cast or crew that you're like, hey, I can talk to this person about it, or I can't talk to that person about it because they don't want to hear about it?
I don't. I've learned not to bring it up if it comes up naturally in a conversation. I've also learned that there's not a lot that you can add to people's, preconceived notions. Some of them, I mean, we need to categorize things and then put a label on it so that we can control it, deal with it, and move on. So
Mm.
most people have one preconception or another, and that's sort of where they're at. So in a public discussion, or a round table or a dinner, um, there's unless you're really focused on the subject, there's not a lot you can sort of add. I was working on The Expanse. We were up in Canada. We were talking with the writers about some episode or another, and the whole thing is about the human expansion into space and how that might really happen. And so it's a hard science fiction type of thing. And I brought that up with the writers. I was like, uh, other civilizations have really expanded into the universe. I mean, they're visiting other stars. And they weren't having that at all. They were like,
Mm.
"Oh, that's nonsense." I was like, "You guys are writing The Expanse, right?" And he's like, "Oh, that's a bunch of crap. It's just nothing to that. It's all a bunch of weird tinfoil hat monkeys running around." And I thought that was really fascinating.
It is ironic. So, kind of on that note, that when you talk about, expanding knowledge, expanding technology, when it comes to AI, right? We mentioned AI a little while ago. What role do you think AI is playing now when it comes to the UAP issue, or might play in the future? I mean, because it really is the ultimate wild card.
Yeah, you're talking about human AI or alien AI? Because I think
Well,
alien AI it plays a huge role.
yeah,
In fact, right now we're starting to come around to the idea that we may have not even met the real organic biological creatures that are responsible for this phenomenon. In fact,
right.
we don't know how interstellar travel works. If nothing can travel faster at the speed of light, a guy named John von Neumann, who worked on the atomic bomb and is one of the
Mm,
most brilliant minds of the 20th century by far,
mm,
probably the most brilliant mind, is a guy named John von Neumann. And von Neumann came up with the concept of, because the question that Enrico Fermi asked is, well, okay, well, if the universe is so big and it's so old, and biological life appears to, the universe appears to be fine-tuned for biological life to emerge, where the hell is everybody?
mm,
And von Neumann's response was that there's no reason why aliens couldn't build machines that traveled at sub-light speed level, but that they were what we now call von Neumann machines, which are
mm.
self-replicating robotic machines that would be able to travel thousands of years because they're unmanned and land on a target planet, and then open up and then use the materials that it finds on that planet to build another von Neumann machine. And then
Wow.
those machines would then take off. So you get this exponentially growing wave of technology passing through a galaxy, right? And then
Mm,
maybe several galaxies you could populate. And then he did the calculations about how long that would take to sort of populate the galaxy, and it's just a few million years.
mm.
Though that might be what we're dealing with. We might be sub-light speed, artificially intelligent probes that land here, and not only are they building other machines just like it. There's a great, I think, very interesting post that came out on 4chan. The guy said he was a military analyst and that they were studying an underwater base, and that underwater base was in the business of making um, probes or spacecraft, or what we would call UFOs, and sending them out on little missions, and that they were unmanned,
Mm.
that they were built to spec for every mission. So if it was wanted to go collect some biology, that all the equipment on board would be designed just to do that. It would go do that, and then it would come back, and that ship would then be disassembled and repurposed to make another ship to do another job.
Wow.
But it doesn't stop there. There's nothing to prevent this same technology from collecting a genetic sample from the target planet, Earth, and then building its own bespoke organisms,
Mm.
biological synthetic organisms to do work here on the planet, which makes a lot of sense.
I was just about to ask you about that, actually, because I think they kind of flow together when it comes to the significance of the idea of, extraterrestrial biological organisms. What would that mean? What would that, look like in the grand scheme of things? The whole picture of, ETs and, well, EBOs for short.
Yeah. Susan Schneider, another really smart lady, she came up with this concept called BISA. I'm going to not remember what BISA stands for, but it's basically biologically intelligent synthetic AI, and this would be, sort of the apotheosis of the merger between artificial intelligence and biology, right? Biology does incredible things that technology can't, just because of atomic sort of tolerances, you can get a hell of a lot more information into a strand of DNA than you can onto a computer chip. So that the best information storage that we know is in our cells, right? I think some guys I think they either did this or they computed that they could take a gram of DNA and that little cube could store every piece of information that we've ever created on the planet so far.
Wow.
Every movie, every book, and you could store all that information into a little tiny gram of genetic material. So why not take advantage of that? It seems from our point of view inevitable that we would start using biology to create technology, right? So there'd be this merger, and then what that does to consciousness is also really interesting. We have a lot to learn from our visitors about consciousness too.
Yeah, on that note too, I mean that entire idea is completely fascinating because, it kind of makes you wonder, what are we looking at in some cases? Are we looking at androids of some sort? Are these just AI type of beings, or is it an actual organic being in some cases? We talk about abduction cases. A lot of abduction cases, people all across the world over decades always refer to the same type of, gray alien.
Yeah.
They always have the triangle face, the big eyes. People or human beings all look different, right? Like you and I sitting here talking to each other, we look different. We have different facial features and things like that. But whenever you have these abduction cases, these beings are always described the same. So how could that be? So it could be that we're looking at, some type of those EBOs, AI, androids, I don't know, clones.
Yeah. Or that could be the ultimate outcome of the melting pot, Not only that, but we're obviously going to start genetically engineering babies, right? That's coming. Why not? Why wouldn't we optimize our children if we have that capacity? I would want a kid with a brain like Einstein and a body like Adonis. Why wouldn't I? That could live for a couple of 100 years healthy. I would love to give that to my kids. And so that's happening. So you're looking at the intersection of technology and biology in a way that people are going to start engineering themselves. And then they're also apparently going to be able to engineer drones, robots. Like the abduction phenomenon doesn't sound that interesting if you're an alien scientist with an IQ that's twice as big as John von Neumann's, right? Like that could get pretty boring pretty quick. Like once or twice, it might be interesting to go to another planet and abduct one of the creatures there and study it. But if you're talking about 80 years of doing that in a repetitive manner, and you seem to be engaged in some sort of program with a specific outcome, then drones are going to be your best bet. They've got to. They need to be smart enough to get the job done and to deal with contingencies. But man, you can think of a lot better ways to spend my time after, I've done that a few hundred times. So I think we're looking at both, and one of the questions is, have we even met, the true sort of originators of this phenomenon? And then you have to look at the 80 years of, not only abduction, that's very recent, but we've got hundreds, maybe thousands, probably thousands of, definitely thousands. What am I talking about? Of contact cases.
Right.
These are cases where, so a farmer or a mailman or, a housewife, every walk of life has had these seemingly spontaneous encounters with landed craft and beings. And these beings are described in such a way that there's so many different varieties that it certainly appears that there's a lot of different sort of advanced civilizations who have come down here, probably for a whole lot of different reasons.
Mm.
And yeah, it's hard to think, of a more exciting sort of occupation than an extraterrestrial scientist who studies, exoplanets and the life on them. I mean, what an incredible, thing to do with your life. So I can 100% see how they're, this would be an experience that's shared by most, or not, if not all, advanced civilizations. So how they get here is going to be part of the answer. Whether or not we're seeing the actual, the real dudes, or we're seeing their avatars.
Mm. It's
I
fascinating.
think it's a bit of both.
I tend to agree with you. I don't think there's one absolute answer. I come kind of with you there. And because, well, one of the reasons why too is when you hear some of these cases of close encounters or abductions, we hear about the phenomenon of telepathy.
Right.
And so one story that pops into my head, and there's been many stories, but most recently, there's been a firsthand witness named Jason Sands.
Okay.
Who's supposed to be coming out in a new James Fox documentary. I've spoken to him personally a couple of times. Great guy, really fascinating story. If not familiar, says he came across a tall white extraterrestrial in the by the Nellis Range out there in the desert where he was working.
What year?
1994.
Okay.
Say, so about 30 years ago. Yeah, fascinating story. And one of the things that happened to him with that meeting was he says he had this telepathic connection to the extraterrestrial. And we hear that a lot with close encounters. So it kind of makes you wonder, what is that telepathic connection, right? What are we tapping into? What are they tapping into? And is this, if we're having a telepathic connection,
right,
in those cases, is that the actual organic being, so to speak?
Well, you got Elon Musk, who says that the eventual outcome of Neuralink is going to be that we can communicate without using language, right?
Yeah.
Mind to mind communication. Language is just a vehicle. It's a symbolic vehicle for our thoughts. But if you can use technology to tap into the pre-lingual thoughts of someone, then you don't have to use the translative mechanism of language that we're so familiar with in order to get our thoughts across. That'll probably increase the speed and the clarity with which we can communicate, because now I have to choose words that are based on my education and my own use of those words, what I'm comfortable with. And there's this whole web of language that our brains need to interface with, to communicate with each other. If you can bypass that, you're also not worried about learning another language. You're not worried about using an AI tool to translate another language. You're going to the source itself. So that's coming, and that's coming using technology that we already understand. We understand that that's a possibility, that we can do that. We've got AI that can read brainwaves now and translate those into images and words. And that's getting better all the time. So one way or another, telepathy is coming. But the part that interests me the most is the phenomenon that Dean Radin has studied, psi phenomenon, and then Hal Puthoff's remote viewing program with Ingo Swann. These point to a real phenomenon of an extended mind, right? That there's more to our consciousness and our conscious experience than, we've all been led to believe, essentially. There's some really good evidence, and that evidence refuses to go away. That's another fringe topic that, rightly so, most, level-headed scientists will say, well, there's nothing there. That's their job. In one sense, is to sort of protect the borders of science, but in the other sense, those borders are under constant assault by the extended mind, as Dean Radin calls it. And if there is something there, then we will figure out how to use technology to enhance it. So remote viewing was, they tried to work that into their spy program. We thought, well, this is great. We can just have a psychic spies, just figure out where the submarines are that Russia's moving around. But the hit rate wasn't 100%.
Right.
Some people are better at it than others. Took a lot of training, and then the results that you got were either spot on or they were off. So as a spy tool, it hasn't really panned out. But we start really investigating that and using technology to enhance it, and then you're looking at a potential vehicle that alien intelligence uses to not only communicate with each other, but very possibly communicate on an interstellar level, because apparently remote viewing operates in a non-physical manner using something like maybe quantum entanglement. We don't know. But the point is you can access information outside of time, and outside of space. So it's not an electromagnetic wave. It's not a link. It's something that we're accessing that's an inherent part of the concept that all points in space and time are connected, right? The field,
Right.
And the quantum fields are another sort of subject that we're just starting to kind of crack and look into. But if these things exist, then you've got interstellar communication using technology and a natural sort of outcome of consciousness in the universe that these beings are able to tap into. And also that kind of stuff completely changes human society, because human society operates under the guise that knowledge is power. And what that means is secrecy is power. If I know something and you don't, I have power over you. And that's the basis of corporations. It's the basis of government. It's one of the underlying features of being a human in today's world. Privacy, the protection of privacy, the right to privacy. This goes all the way back to John Locke. So it's fundamental to the human experience. But all of that goes away if you have a technology where you can access not someone else's brainwaves, not their thoughts, but the actual events that have happened in reality at any time and any place. Now that's really heavy stuff, and we're a long way from sort of being able to verify whether this is a real phenomenon. But looking at alien intelligence, it appears that it might be, and that's. Go ahead.
No, it's incredible because I don't know, maybe there's a telepathic connection here, because it was something that I was going to bring up and you brought it up for me, and that is the remote viewing aspect. Edgar Casey, you mentioned Ingo Swann. Someone that comes into my mind is Joseph McMoneagle, who is an incredible person. Statistically speaking, the most successful remote viewer in U.S. military history. And that's a guy who, you talk about kind of like interstellar communication. You put it perfectly about being outside of time. That's the way he puts it in different interviews about it. And
Right.
in one famous instance, this was actually something I covered on a previous episode of UAP, because I just found it so incredibly fascinating. He talked about having a connection to an extraterrestrial on Mars from like a million years ago.
Right.
And it's an unbelievable story. So when you hear something like that, it really opens up an infinite amount of doors about what this could be, what our existence could be,
About the
what our capabilities really are.
Yeah, about what the nature of reality is,
Yeah.
and these are essentially avenues of pursuit for us right now. And I think that people who study this behind closed doors, obviously these alien technologies and societies are being studied, and they're trying to put their best minds on it. There's the secrecy is really getting in the way of them being able to really open the subject up and make progress on it. But if these things exist, then you know that we're trying to figure out why they exist and what are the underlying components of reality that make these things possible, right? And so it kind of gives us a little bit, alien visitation gives us a window into our own future and
Mm,
also the nature of reality, how reality is really put together. And it gets beyond our sphere, our human sphere of knowledge, which is unbroken for 50,000 years. We've been putting together this human knowledge sphere, the noosphere Chardin talked about. That's the unbroken historic line of human knowledge that's accumulating over time and continues up to this very moment. Well, that
mm,
knowledge sphere is now being impinged by another knowledge sphere, right? And you can tell looking at the cases that they're very kind of careful in how they perturb our knowledge sphere, for example, when there's no cases of alien abductee or someone who finds themselves on an alien craft, there's no art. There's the outfits that the aliens wear is very plain, very simple. You might see an insignia somewhere. You might see something like a collar. Other than that, there's no cultural communication that these aliens are communicating. They never tell us anything about their society. They never tell
mm.
us where they're from. So they're keeping that cultural communication to a minimum. And what we can actually say we know about these visitors is very slim.
Yeah.
We kind of describe their technology and that they're here, and that's about it. They appear to be up to some sort of program that has something to do with biology, and perhaps they're creating hybrid alien humans to live and work here. That those are possibilities, but everything is um, frustratingly opaque.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it, which is why we keep asking the questions, right? And why we have these
And why
discussions.
we're supposed to ask the questions.
Yeah,
And that's another.
right.
They've studied. They obviously probably know more about us than we know about ourselves. So they're able to predict with some accuracy what our response is going to be. Right.
Mm,
So we have to factor that in. So whatever we do know about visiting aliens, they want us to know. We
yeah.
have to factor that in. What do they want us to know? What do they don't want us to know? And what that might mean for why they're here. What are they doing? What do they want? All the good questions.
That actually leads into another question I have written down. Thank you for all the segues, by the way. I mean, it's just fantastic. It makes it so easy. um, do you think, and this is completely hypothetical, so I mean, but do you think there is a certain point that ETs, whatever race of ETs it might be, that they're waiting for the human race to get to? Whether it's an awakening, whether it's a telepathic communication, whether it's, some type of clean energy acceptance, I don't know. Do you think there's a point that they're waiting for the human race to get to before they make that, here we are type of connection?
Well, you mean before we actually are able to sort of interact with these alien intelligences?
Yeah, it's a good way to
Have,
put it.
with the gap between us is entirely too large to have any kind of meaningful understanding.
Mm,
We are still incredibly primitive in our thinking. And we have competing models of reality. And we don't know which are the valid ones and which aren't. We operate humanity under a belief system, right?
mm,
We have belief systems. We believe in materiality. We believe in the existence of a universal God. But these are belief systems. We don't have enough evidence or experience to be able to understand whether both are true or neither are true. So when you're dealing with creatures who have a much different understanding of reality, there's nothing for us to talk about.
mm, mm.
Now, whether or not they're waiting for us to catch up, I doubt it. I think that they've got enough conversations that they've got going on that are interesting. I don't think they're particularly interested, but in us and what we might have to contribute to the conversation, which at this point is nothing.
Hmm.
So right now, shut up and listen is the best policy, and I think that we are being managed. I think that our own technological ability is approaching the area that could become dangerous to them, right?
Hmm.
So whether maybe it's my Darwinian thinking, but I'm under the impression that an alien civilization would keep the integrity of that civilization paramount in their minds at all time. They've been around for a really long time. They plan on being around for a really long time, and they need to manage situations that could become problems to them later, not while
Hmm.
they happen the way we do. Oh my God, that guy just blew up that building. Let's go bomb those guys, right? They're
Right.
trying to nip this stuff in the bud early enough so that we won't become a problem. And I think that we're not the only ones. If there's several thousand or million advanced alien civilizations out there, that means there's an exponentially larger number of less advanced or primitive civilizations out there, right? So we're
Yeah.
not the only monkeys, trying to figure out, how to steal the keys to the Maserati.
Hmm.
There's lots of other guys out there, and you wouldn't believe what these other idiots get up to. So we're probably part of a management system that we're just a small part of a much larger management system, which makes perfect sense to me.
Really interesting because it also kind of makes you think about where what do I guess as far as the connections go with all of this, right? Where we talk about, is there a spiritual connection? Some people talk about that there's some type of spiritual connection to all of this, that maybe some people in the know, so to speak, don't want to have it get out. I mean, do you buy into any of that as far as what type of interaction this might have with, the spiritual side of things?
I think that the control systems that we have instantiated here on planet Earth have been around for a really long time, and that those control systems need to deal with our evolving technology and any other evolving sort of threats that come along and need to be absorbed into that control system, right? We see this, most obviously with the church and how they were able to control human society for so long, and then the baton got passed to science, and now we use science and technology to sort of make the rules
Mm.
and control human society. And there's always been a control system, and that control system includes all the things that are most basic to humanity, spirituality being one of them. So that's another component to this whole mystery, is how the controllers, the people who operate the control systems that we are all yoked under, how they deal with the phenomenon and what they're trying to protect. So that's another sort of barrier between us and the reality of the phenomenon, is the people keeping the secrets, the people manipulating our understanding of these secrets. So we're doing all that ourselves, and we don't. If we get down to it, we don't have an understanding of what consciousness is. What we really don't. The spiritual component, it appears to be, and it is to us, very real. Um, but what the nature of that spirituality is there's probably another disconnect between us and the alien intelligence. But in my opinion, um, the concept of love in appears to be a really good definition for the universe itself. The the cultivation of information is another way that you can say it. The universe is an information producing machine. And over time, that information gets more and more complex, right? We started out, this is Terence McKenna. We started out as the universe, like nothing happened for billions of years, just flat, empty. And then stars began to form, and then and then complexity began to emerge. And now humanity is one of the sort of premier information crunching machines that the universe has produced. And those appear, so that another way of sort of defining the cultivation and preservation of information is love, right? Because that's kind of what love means.
It's deep. It's deep, man.
Goes deep.
Yeah, that's good. On that note, though, do you think people are ready for it? Right, because that's, like you said, it's deep. It's a deep conversation. There's a lot to it. There's a lot that maybe, like you said, we don't even understand sometimes of what really goes into all this and the existential questions that surround, extraterrestrial life and life in the universe. Do you think people are ready to hear some type of version of disclosure?
Well, you're never really ready, right? I mean, things happen that change civilization, and is anyone never really sort of ready for it? I mean, and the fallout would be the repercussions would happen in ways that we can't predict. And my example is the pill, which was legalized in 1960, but only for married couples, because the government and society, we didn't want women running around, being able to have sex with whoever they wanted. But married couples who wanted or didn't want to have a kid, that was okay. It was in 1972 that the pill was finally legalized with a big Supreme Court ruling case that made the pill available to all women. And that's how we got disco and the swinging 70s, because women were now liberated to have sex on a casual basis. Because before that, if you had a kid and the dude, didn't want to marry you, you were completely fucked as a woman. It was hard for a woman to work a full-time job. It was a different world. But the pill changed the world and the way we run society, right? It also, the pill, which was designed to prevent babies unwanted babies from popping in to our reality, actually created more unwed mothers and more abortions, right? So it had the opposite effect of what we were, trying to use it for, and also changed society in ways that nobody could predict. So the same thing would happen with alien disclosure. It's a process. I don't think that the government is going. People study this stuff. They know what's up. The Brookings report came out in 1960 and said, this is probably not a good idea. You would disrupt society. Well, they weren't talking about you and me. They were talking about the power structures that control human society. So the Brookings report, if you read between the lines, and they're very smart people who wrote the damn thing, so you should be reading between the lines, the message is really clear. This is a disruptor. It disrupts the power structures that are currently the pillars of human society. Bad idea. And that's still true today. It's a bad idea to the power structures, right? So this kind of disclosure is only going to happen through the conversations that we're having now. And it's going to be a process. It's going to be a slow process. But that's not going to stop us from asking the questions and starting to create a body of knowledge, in the marketplace of ideas. Some ideas sound interesting now, and in 5 years, they're going to be totally crazy, because this is the marketplace of ideas. This is where good ideas rise to the top and the untrue ideas kind of fall apart over time. So what, like it or not, alien intelligence has inserted itself into the human marketplace of ideas, and is already evolving and having an impact on human society, and that will only continue to grow.
What do you make of some of the names like David Grush and other whistleblowers out there? You know, people who've worked in the program, so to speak, as they call it, who, you know, they testify in front of Congress and they do the 60-minute interviews like Lou Elizondo or, you know, Christopher Mellon, all these high level guys who
Yeah,
worked in the programs or know people who worked in the programs. I
sure.
mean, do you think we're going to see more of that when it comes to more guys coming out and trying to have these conversations out in the open?
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, you go all the way back to Carl Wolf and all the guy Donna Hare, all the people who testified in the mock congressional trials in 2001 and I think 2011. And so this is also part of the evolution, right? So now we're seeing actual sort of congressional testimony happen
Yeah.
for the first time in 50 years. So this is all part of the process, and it's an important part of the process, and we will see more because these human beings exist who have done the work, who have had direct contact with the materials and with the technology and other things, and they will slowly start to come forward. They obviously they saw what happened to Grush, and that would give anybody pause. You know, he was threatened. He went through a really tough time. So he's a heroic figure
Yeah.
who actually stood up and told the truth in an environment that does not want to hear it. So that's in my definition of a hero. And a trailblazer. And yes, we will continue to see as this becomes easier to talk about, and as the protections are put into place by the power structures, we're going to see more of this and that, and that's all great, fantastic.
Yeah, I hope so. Right. And then we'll continue to have the conversations. And
Yeah, and it allows us to take the subject seriously. We're already seeing more academics come out and start to enter the conversation, and that's what we really need. We really need scientists, academics, thinkers to have the freedom to be able to come out and sort of say what, because there's a lot of them that are thinking about this stuff, but they're not, the structure is not in place for them to be able to communicate to the public freely. That can't happen. They can do that privately, but we're starting to see that change. And
yeah,
that's a big deal. That's probably the biggest deal that we have, and that if we're here to support something or encourage something, the most important aspect of the phenomenon, and it's a direct result of things like the testimony of David Grush, is allowing academics and scientists to begin to enter the conversation. It's the most important aspect of the phenomenon today.
Yeah, that is huge to have, that confidence, right? Because that's somebody that people just inherently trust. It's like, well, like Dr. Michael Masters.
They're trained thinker. Yeah, Masters is guy. I just bought his book, Identified Flying Objects. I can't wait to read it. But they're trained thinkers, and they're also very versed in sort of the human knowledge sphere that we were talking about, right? They're extremely well versed in one particular aspect of sort of like our knowledge, our history of that knowledge in a particular subject, whether it's microbiology or nanotechnology, or evolutionary archaeology. So they have contributions to make within their field, and they should be making those contributions.
That's fantastic. And I know I don't want to keep you too long. I feel like we could talk probably for a couple more hours, but I don't want to take up your entire day. Thomas J, thanks so much for coming on here, UAP. I wanted to ask you, I guess maybe more along the lines of some of the Hollywood questions, right? Now, this maybe is a silly conspiracy theory, but I'm always willing to throw them out there, so that's fine. When we talk about, having the discussions, asking the questions, disclosure and those things, do you think Hollywood has played a part intentionally or unintentionally in kind of training people to accept some of these ideas with, some of the more famous movies like A Contact or Independence Day and things like Close Encounters of the Third Kind? I mean, has that played a part in kind of training people over the decades to take this conversation more seriously, or do you think it's had the reverse effect?
Stories are a reflection of the society that creates the stories.
Hmm.
Hollywood is about making a buck. You know, it's expensive to make a movie. So if you're going to spend them all the time and energy and money to create something, you want to make something that people want to watch. So that's number one. You know, the other side is there's a little bit of CIA meddling in certain aspects, especially the political movies or the movies about war. You know, the CIA's got their stamp all over that. They don't. Stories are powerful. They don't want messages out there that don't align with the narrative that they want to promote, right? So that's another part of it. But with the alien subject, I think it's more of the marketplace of ideas that we're seeing. You know, the stories that are coming out are reflective of the society that is, you know, going to be listening and watching those stories, and that really is the best way to look at the Hollywood stuff. You know, yeah, there's a little bit of conditioning, but it's definitely a, you know, a self-reinforcing feedback loop where the stories that are being reinforced are the stories that, you know, most people sort of want to hear, that they call the lowest common denominator. It really, you know, is, and then every now and then you'll get an outlier, you know, like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is still the best movie made about the UFO subject. But you know, we could use another one. I hear Spielberg is working on another UFO film, and
Yeah.
that'll be the most anticipated movie for me, for sure.
I mean, are you trying to get in that? Are they asking you to be a part of the project? I mean, what's going on? Come on.
They got my numbers, but so far Spielberg hasn't called me.
All
I'm,
right.
I'm a big fan. I love watching. Love watching. He's just some of the best. He's one of the all-time great filmmakers that we've ever had. He's a treasure.
No, I completely agree. I mean, do they talk though? Guys like James Cameron or Steven Spielberg, do they talk to some of these agency guys to try to get some real information to put, you know, whether it's, you know, again, War of the Worlds, you know, Steven Spielberg was involved with that, of course, the remake of it. I mean, are they getting some type of inside information to help as far as research and messaging some of these movies, or
So
is
we've
that too far
created
off?
last year. We started this thing called the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance.
Yes.
We've got, I forget, it's like 100 now, different UFO and alien researchers who have been professionals in the field. And the idea is something like the Science and Entertainment Exchange, where if you're working on a script about nanotechnology, you can call the Science and Entertainment Exchange, and they'll hook you up with a nanotechnologist that can walk you through the latest science, and then you have the opportunity to incorporate that into your story. We're doing the same thing with UFOs and aliens, you know, where people
Mm.
want to inject, you know, a sense of reality in the subject into their film. We can hook them up with different experts in the particular area of interest, you know. So we're trying to inject a deeper sense of the reality of the phenomenon into the stories that we tell about the phenomenon, because there's few and far between in Hollywood movies that injects a sense of sort of what's really happening. And in my opinion, what's really happening is way more interesting than the Hollywood versions that we've seen so far.
Mm, it's a good point. Maybe it's even watered down a little bit in some of the Hollywood versions. And shout out to the HDA and Dan Harari, by the way. He invited me to become part of the HDA, and
It's a
I
good
think it's
organization. It's got a good goal in mind, and
yeah.
hopefully we can begin to have an impact on the stories that we tell about this subject. I think I'm all in on that, you know.
No, that's awesome. What do you think has been the most impactful movie? Is it Close Encounters? Is it, you know, more of the, I guess, sensationalized ones like Independence Day? I think Contact is a great movie, Jodie Foster. I mean, and so many of these movies have been made. Do you think there's one that's had more impact on the discussion than others?
Well, you mentioned two of my favorites, Contact and Close Encounters. You know, certainly open the mind. You know, in ways that I think that's part of our job. And you know, and the rest of them are just, you know, takeoffs of War of the Worlds, and that's a story that's been told for well over 100 years now.
Yeah.
So we definitely have both. I'm hoping that we can start to change the narrative and get into some stories that really open people's minds and make them think about the subject in new ways. I think there's nothing more powerful than storytelling in our society. It's one of the things we do best as human beings.
I meant to ask you this earlier, so it might be out of place now. I don't want to feel like I'm jumping around, but have you had any personal encounters yourself, personal stories, dreams, sightings that have given you pause in the past?
I have had experiences in the past that kind of led me down the rabbit hole. I think that's happened with a lot of people who are take a keen interest in the subject. They've had experiences they can't explain, and that sends them down the rabbit hole. And then, in my case, I was completely flabbergasted to find that there was a real phenomenon going on here. I completely bought into the military's narrative that there was nothing to see here. So it was mind-boggling, and it's quite an awakening. So it really is a powerful subject, and it can change lives. Our quest right now is to find ways to bridge the gap between people who are on the fence or completely closed down to even the concept, looking at the idea that they've already made up their mind. Like, how do we start turning more heads? Because that's what we need. We need more brains on this problem. And the only way to do that is to get people to look at it. And the only way to do that is to offer compelling reasons why this phenomenon might be real.
What was that moment for you, right? Where you said, well, geez, there's really something to this. What was it? Just, what New York Times article, something that you saw in the news and it just hit you, or something that's, you just realized, hey, there's a lot going on here?
For me, you just got to start reading the books and looking at the history. So I'm a book guy. So my first go-to was to, what's been written about this subject, And I went back to the beginning. I started looking at Donald Kehoe's, work, and Frank Edwards, and then sort of followed that trajectory. Got into the work of James E. McDonald, who was an atmospheric scientist who worked on this problem for years and really did some really initial scientific work in the subject. And then you get into J. Allen Hynek and Project Blue Book, and studying Blue Book, with a skeptical but open eye. And then you read Richard Dolan's UFOs and the National Security State, which is a fantastic sort of document of the military and the government interaction with the phenomena. You start putting the pieces together. It's certainly not one book that you can read and go, okay, I figured this out. But it's like a puzzle, and you start putting the pieces together slowly, following your nose, hope, in my case, trusting my nose. I got a pretty good bullshit meter, and seeing where it takes you, and then I've reached a point where it become more about sort of what my own personal interests, where they lie, and sort of the consciousness studies and the interaction of the actual intelligence, why they're here, what do they want. So I wrote a book. It's called A Human's Guide to Visiting Aliens. I'm editing that now. And
Nice.
that's my, my contribution to the conversation, just based on notes that I've been making and things that I've been sort of observing over the years, and have something to add that I haven't seen a lot written about. Jim Marrs wrote a great book called The Alien Agenda, which is a really terrific book. But, outside of Jim Marrs' Alien Agenda, there's not a whole lot that's been sort of really tried to tackle what this intelligence is, who they are, what do they want, why are they here, and what that means for us. What does it mean for the future of humanity? What does it mean for humanity today? What can we learn? All that stuff really fascinating to me.
No, I think it's great. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. And I mean, when the book comes out, I'd love to have you back on. We can talk about the book and what's in there and everything.
You bet. I'd love to do that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
We've got, what is it? July. We're in July. July 25th. I've got a new season of my show that I produced, directed, starred in. It's called Troppo.
Nice.
We shoot it in Australia. So season 2 of Troppo drops on the 25th of July on Amazon. So please check that out.
Awesome.
We had a lot of fun doing that, and I directed a couple of the episodes this year, so I'm proud of that.
That's awesome, man. And actually, well, leads me into my final topic, which is I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about some of, the great work that you've done on the big screen and on the small screen. I was a fan of you before we started speaking. Now I'm a fan of you personally because I think you're awesome and you've been great to come on here. Super nice and super smart, by the way. In case anybody didn't know, Thomas Jane's a very smart guy. Knows you know your stuff.
See.
So, but I was a fan of you back during The Punisher. So I've got to ask you about the Punisher film. I think, and this is just me inserting my own fanboyism here, so please excuse me. I think it's one of the biggest travesties of all time in Hollywood history that we did not get a sequel to The Punisher. What happened there with the studios? There was so much great story to tell, and you did such a fantastic job bringing that role to life.
Right.
Can you give us a little insight of what happened there after the first one came out?
Well, obviously we worked on the sequel. We went through a few different writers. I was, privileged enough to be able to work with some of these guys. Stuart Beattie at one point was writing a Punisher script. He'd run off and he took another job for some reason. And we had a couple of different directors so we're working on getting the sequel together. And then I managed to get a meeting with Walter Hill, who I'm a huge fan of. Huge fan of Walter. I mean, huge Walter Hill fan, right? And I love the tone. And the tone and the style that he brings, I felt was perfect for Punisher, and Walter wanted to do it. We had several meetings, talked about what the story might be. Walter was going to write it. Of course, he's got all the help he would ever need in that department. A guy wrote Alien, for God's sake. And took it into Lionsgate, and they turned us down, which I still sort of can't. I don't understand, So, but I basically said, "Listen, you're going to turn down Walter Hill. So who do you have in mind?" And the director they had in mind hadn't done anything that would tell me that they knew the character or the world or really understood, especially if you're looking between Walter Hill and another person who whose body of work didn't tell me that they understood that sort of genre. So I walked away. To make a long story short, I just, I think that Lionsgate had some money that they needed to spend before the end of that year. So they were kind of pushing something to happen that was not organically ready to happen. And that's why I just said, I'd rather just not do something that's going to be really bad.
Yeah.
And that was, I did a little short film called Dirty Laundry. If anyone hasn't seen Dirty Laundry on YouTube, check that out.
Yes. I was about to bring that up actually, because that kind of did, in a short film way, fulfill the, some of the things that the fans were wondering, what would a sequel look like?
Right.
Yeah. So yeah. I thought that was great.
That was a lot of fun. And I really like, what's his name, who's playing the Punisher now. I think he's great.
Yeah, John Barenthal, he does a really good job, and they did a great job with that series. Yeah. I mean, just personally, I think it would be pretty cool if they had you as a, kind of a cameo in there, some type of working you in on that series.
One day I'll direct something that's sort of similar in that vein. I would do a great job doing that.
That'd be awesome.
It's at right now. I had a great time directing Troppo, and I directed an episode of The Expanse, which I'm very proud of. So that's kind of heading in that direction now. I've got a company called Renegade. We're developing a few films, and we've got another show with MGM that we're putting together. So I'm having a lot of fun doing that kind of thing today.
That's awesome. I was wondering because I saw recently a documentary on Gene Wilder, who is one of my favorites of all time. It's on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, it was really well done.
Okay.
But they talked about kind of that transition of, on the screen to behind the scenes when he directed a few different movies. How different is that? I mean, what's the experience like when you kind of go behind the scenes? I'm sure it's a totally different sense of fulfillment. I would imagine.
Well, you're curating a movie from beginning to end, a story. Whether it's movies, television, whatever you're doing, you're curating a story. You're developing and then sort of bringing to life a story is really what you're doing. And if you're good at it and you're able to communicate what the story should be to enough people, because you need so many different technicians and craftsmen and artists to help you put this story together. And it really comes down to your ability to communicate what the story is and what do you want. And that gives everybody an idea of what you don't want. Carving away what it's not is almost more important, to sort of, and then what it is will reveal itself. But that being in the business long enough to understand what's most important about how that process works is why I'm getting a real kick out of producing and directing these days. Because it's a dense, like the study of alien intelligence, it's a dense, complex, multifaceted, multi-layered process. And for my money, definitely worth dedicating a life to and learning about. You never stop learning. So there's full of surprises, and like William Goldman says, nobody knows anything.
Yeah. Very cool, man. That's awesome. And I would be remiss if I would actually get yelled at. I might be sleeping on the couch if I didn't say that my wife wanted me to tell you that she loved you in Deep Blue Sea. So, got to get that out there. She actually had it on the other day. I'm like, I'm going to be talking to him in just a few days on UAP. So,
well, tell her I said thanks.
Absolutely. One of the all-time surprise scenes with Samuel L. Jackson too. I mean, every time I see that scene where he's giving the speech, it's just like, whoa, where did that come from?
Yeah, we screened that in New York City, and before the premiere, we had a sneak screening in New York City, and you couldn't. After Sam Jackson got eaten by the shark, you couldn't hear the movie for about 5 minutes. People lost their minds. It was so fun to watch. And you could see the studio guys running out of the theater calling, and they were saying, we need to put more money into the advertising here. We've really got something. But by then, the ball had already been rolling.
That's funny.
So what was it? Blair Witch Project beat us at the box office, which was shot in my backyard. So that was personally offended by the Blair Witch Project, which they literally shot in the woods of Maryland, where I grew up.
Oh, that's wild.
And then that came out and did this. It was the first sort of online publicity campaign that produced a #1 movie. It was a phenom. It just came out of nowhere, and that it's unwatchable. The damn movie's unwatchable. But Deep Blue Sea is still hanging in there. So
that's awesome. I love that. That's great. Well, before we go, Thomas, what else would you like to throw out there? I mean, where can people find you on social media? How can they follow you? Again, all the projects you were talking about you have coming up. Reiterate some of that before we go.
It's Card Carrying Thomas Jane, I think, on Instagram or something like that. I don't follow any of that stuff, but I do post things that I'm up to, or if you send me a link to this, I'll throw it up on there so people can find out what I'm doing. Going on there. Otherwise, stay the fuck off of social media, people. It's a waste of life. Pick up a goddamn book. Here, this is a good one. I'm reading this right now.
Weird Tales. Very cool. I don't break it now. Goodness.
Well, that was the cat.
Ah, jeez. Well, this has been great, Thomas Jane. Thanks so much for coming on here at UAP. It's awesome discussion, and I hope we can do it again. Like I said, when your book comes out, there's a lot of ground still that we could cover. I had this whole note page here of questions and notes, and I think maybe I got to 30% of it. So
right on. You do your homework, pal, and that's what counts right now. So good for you.
I appreciate it. Well, we'll definitely do it again, hopefully sometime in the future, and can't wait for when that happens. Thomas Jane, thanks a lot coming on here at UAP. Appreciate it.
Right on.